when a pair of stilettos appeared on the polished wooden floor in front of him. He'd already spotted the distinctive shoes in the corner of his eye during the Romeo and Juliet. He was just reaching the crescendo when a woman in the front row crossed her legs and the stilettos darted into his view and consciousness. As the crescendo grew, so did the movement of her toes. For a while, he'd held on to the image of her feet and those smooth, slender daggers. He'd held on to the image of Juliet, of someone who could reach into his gilded cage and release the other wing, a wing clipped by years of sacrifice and unerring discipline. And then she uncrossed her legs.
Concentrate, Bob. How do you expect an audience to respect your playing if your thoughts are elsewhere?
Yes, Madam G. His reverie was broken when the woman in the queue gingerly crossed one stiletto over the other. The resulting shape on the floor made Bobby shudder. Keeping his eyes low, he pretended to check the cartridge in his fountain pen. In fact, he was intrigued by the form at his feet. The crossed stilettos, the shape of them, reminded him of an image that was all too distant and yet too familiar. That of Romeo, the ibis with the clipped wing that he had known as a boy. Only that here, the bird's wings were free and ready to fly. Hello. You'll be pleased to see that I'm the end of the queue. The sculptor was leaning over the table, so close that if he'd reached out, he could have traced the outline of her face with his finger. You must be exhausted after that amazing performance. Would you mind just dedicating a CD?
Not at all. What is your name?
My name is Juliet.
Juliet?
Yes, Juliet. Their eyes met and remained locked for more than a moment. Juliet's eyes were warm and dark, just as he'd always hoped they would be. The lights in the auditorium were being switched off. Someone called out in the distance, "Night."
Night.
The pianist and the sculptor were left alone in the hall, apart from the moonlight quietly dancing across the floor. Juliet's question came out abruptly. She promised herself she wouldn't say it. What would he think of her? She bit her tongue, pursed her lips. It was no use. Out it came. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but did you know that your right ear looks like a treble clef? There followed what can only be described as an eruption of mirth. When at last Bobby mopped his eyes and stopped laughing, it occurred to him that he hadn't laughed like this since he'd wobbled the jelly on Mum's arm. He let out a deep sigh. It may have been a trick of the light, but when he turned to look back at her, his eyes looked moist. Slowly, his lips curled into a smile. It happened imperceptibly, like the smoke that magically appears at twilight from a cottage chimney pot, signaling the end of a long day and the promise of sweet solace. Bobby suddenly felt emboldened to speak.
Juliet, would you find it weird attending a whole banquet with pianos?
Banquets with pianos. Oh, what fun! That sounds wonderful. Do you know, it reminds me of something I do when I'm sculpting.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
I'm so glad you came, Juliet. Can I buy you a drink?
A drink? Thank you. I'd like that. Bobby ushered Juliet towards the door. He didn't notice, but she was barefoot. She hadn't meant to be. She'd slipped out of her stilettos to relieve her aching feet, and then the lights went out. As the heavy oak closed behind them, leaving the auditorium empty, something began to stir in the darkness, just where the pianist and sculptor had first spoken. It was the silhouette of two graceful stilettos rising and gliding over the floor. They joined together in the twilight, and then gradually stretched out a pair of wings. After a flutter or two, a delicate ibis flew out through the French windows and over the yew trees, which at once huddled closer to each other to confer about this unusual happening. Later, the bird passed Assisi, causing a frenzy of twittering amongst the local population. Then it continued on its orbit around the Earth until it reached Bobby's native town, Sandakan, in Malaysia.